Welcome, everyone, to the EvoSec podcast. My name is Eric Davis, one half of the Tactical Twins. I am flying solo again, unfortunately. Aaron couldn't be with us this evening, but I am blessed to be in the presence of Sam Ferguson of Galo Combatives Group, a up-and-coming combatives instructor that I think is going to boom into the scene. And I'll say this, Sam, before I fully introduce you. One of the most favorite people in my life, most influential persons in my life is Craig Douglas of ShivWorks, right? And I saw recently where he said of you, he said, Sam is a wrecking ball, explanation point. I don't know if you saw that on social media or not. But frankly, man, when you have Craig Douglas talking like that, you are certainly the real deal, man. How are you doing? Welcome.
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Not bad. I had a little.
Also, I feel like Craig's too generous to me, though. Like,
nah, I don't think so. So this is something I do feel like that I know Craig really well. You know, I've hosted him many times over the years. I count him as a dear friend. Craig doesn't say shit that he doesn't mean. I'm just laying it out.
He'll definitely get in your ass if he thinks you're not doing something right. There's been a couple times he got on me about not doing something the way he was wanting me to do. There's one time I was at ECQC for Leo, and I can't remember the evolution. But anyway, I ended up taking a guy down and pinning him for a second. I got my pistol out because it was playing murder, death, kill. I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but like that's how sure. I refer to it. There's no like rules of engagement, right? Like you've got a gun, I've got a gun. We're going to try and kill each other.
It's the problem, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And I got this guy down. I was had him in mounted crucifix. And I got my pistol out and smoked him. He was like, and he looked at me like, "What the fuck, Ferg?" You know what I mean? And so he was wanting me to work more on, his curriculum, right? Like the stand-up grappling aspects of it. But like thing was a lot of times whenever I would make first contact with somebody, I would unintentionally ground them. And that's, you know what I mean? Like, cause I'm so thinking that like, if I don't aggressively move into them, they're going to be able to stay in that striking range and keep peppering me up if we're, trying to grapple, that I would, move explosively into them and, sometimes they end up taking down. Sometimes, it would just kind of happen that way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and Sam, let's face it. You're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk about your background. You're also a wrestler. That's where you feel comfortable. And I get it. It's funny as I think about it, and I'm not to your level of grappling, but I also have a lot of experience in that environment. So I feel fairly comfortable in that environment, even against folks that have more higher level skills than I do. But the point is that I imagine that when he had you in the classes that he really had, there had to be somebody at a decent level of skills that he set up against you, huh? Or
Yeah, I mean, so
if you want to talk about it, it's an interesting subject.
So I mean, I think like usually the highest level you'll have in that class is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu or so. A lot of times, right? Like there's a lot more black belts whenever I was at coming up through the ranks, right? But it's still relatively rare, right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
So there weren't very many guys that were black belts and were still actively competing. And then on top of that, like I'm not a huge guy, right? Because like I'm around some really big guys, but at the same time, I'm 6 foot 1.5, 2, depending on what convenience store I'm leaving, and then I'm about 215 to 235, depending on where I'm at in my cutting and weightlifting cycles.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's still a little bit difficult to team you up with folks, but it's one of those things I talk about on a fairly regular basis because I had a lot of experience with training under Craig, it got to the point where he would choose me first, and he would look around the room and find whoever the toughest dude was in it. So
Yeah,
it's always the way it goes for me. But now that I'm getting older, I'm it's a little that's a little harder for me these
yeah.
days. But yeah, it's still something I feel fairly comfortable in. But so I'll say this, just because we're on the subject, how many times have you taken some of Craig's classes? And then we'll move on to your content.
Uh, 4 or 5. So I'm pretty uh, well versed in the chivalrous material, right?
Hmm.
So Larry Lindeman's been on the show before, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Me and Larry went from white to black belt together, more or less.
Wow. Yeah. So then
Yeah.
you and forgive me, I knew that you had exposure, quite a bit of exposure, but
Yeah,
I certainly didn't know that well,
yeah.
of
So
course it
Larry got
makes sense. You're
his.
from Illinois,
Yeah,
which is yeah. So now I'm putting two and two together.
yeah. So me and Larry, we I first met him when he was a white belt and I was a white belt, and he got his black belt I think a year or two before me. Um, but yeah, me and Larry have known each other since we were white belts.
So
So I
so
got
were you on TPI as well?
no. So at the time when I met Larry, I was 21. I started jiu-jitsu. Well, let me take it back. I started training seriously. Like that was like my full-time thing. 2 days after I turned 21, because I was really hungover, and my dad didn't want to buy me a nice bottle of bourbon for my 21st birthday because my dad hates drinking. And so he's like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'll go ahead and buy you a membership to this MMA gym. And it was a Carlson Gracie affiliate. And at the
Awesome.
time, Larry was training there. We had you know, the best wrestling coach I've ever been around. He's now the head coach at Michigan, Sean Bourmet.
Oh
So like,
wow.
yeah. So whenever I was fighting MMA, we had Mike Corey who fought for the Bellator belt, Rick Lamas who fought for the UFC belt, Andre Arlovsky, um, Mike Russo. I sort of said Mike Corey. There's 4 or 5 other guys that had all been at the really high level because Sean Bourmet is a phenomenal coach.
Wow, that's awesome. Some impressive
Yeah,
names whom I've all heard of. And yeah, that's a cool background. And I don't know why I didn't put two and two together about Larry, being in that same area.
no, yeah.
And
Larry's
I was about to say a good bottle of bourbon is awesome, but jujitsu, I mean, it's not even on the same scale.
no,
I would
it's
say
not.
I'd say that was probably one of the coolest things your dad could have ever done for you,
Yeah, no,
right?
it was. I think if I had taken drinking to the level I've taken jiu-jitsu and combat sports, I'd probably be dead by now.
So man, that's a great story. Well, man, before we get too far, and sometimes we do shows this way, we just kick off and start talking. But for our audience members that may not know you, some have heard me talk about you some, and a lot of people in our audience are going to know you. But for those that don't, go ahead and give us a bio real quick. How did you get to where you are currently today, buddy?
Okay. Started wrestling when I was in 8th grade, so 8 years old. Um, wrestled all the way through high school. Was not a great wrestler, but only was a good state, and I was a state qualifier, and I set a bunch of records within my high school. My high school wasn't a wrestling powerhouse, but I was one of the best wrestlers to come through my high school. But I never medaled at state or anything like that. Um, then I went and didn't want to wrestle in college because I was the awkward weight. I was 215, and the weight classes for college are 197 and heavyweight. So I didn't want to spend my freshman year, you know, being in a sauna suit and not drinking beer,
Yeah.
chasing women. So I decided to play football for a couple years. Didn't really like football in college as much. I was at a smaller school and it just wasn't necessarily ideal for me because a lot of the guys I felt like just want to be a part of a team. Like they looked at the football team like they look at a fraternity, and if I'm in it to win it, right? And that kind of didn't sit right with me some. So I was like, you know what, I really miss wrestling. I've always wanted to fight, so I started fighting. Um, had a bunch of boxing fights, not a bunch. I had a good amount of boxing fights. I had 8. I was 4-4, I think. I don't remember. It's been years now. Um, then fought MMA for a while. Was 9-1 in MMA. Decided it was time for me to start getting my life together because I'm been told, especially my hair's cut short, I got a Keith Vineyard vibe look to me, and so it was hurting me in the application process for police departments. Right between me just looking like a meathead and whenever I'm clean cut, it's just like, man, probably don't want him, right? Nasty cauliflower ears. So I was like, all right.
Which I think that's, I mean, if police departments are looking for folks and a dude with cauliflower ears walks in, they should be going, yep, you're going to the academy. I mean, literally, man, I can't understand why any administrator wouldn't look
But,
at that as a valid reason. But go ahead, please.
so, I mean, I feel like my department's kind of an exception to it. Even though most of the guys that have made it up to the higher levels weren't necessarily like hands-free guys. They were all weapons guys. Right. Um, but I feel like the people that become high level or not high level, high ranking police officers, they're not the people who are out there kicking, kicking the bushes, right? That's just not the people that get promoted. The people that get
Right.
promoted are the people who are good test takers.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah.
You
I'm
know,
not that I'm in law enforcement, but I know a lot of you
well,
guys
it's
are
the
some
same
of
thing in
my
the
good friends.
military,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh
Like
yeah. Same thing.
the guys that are out there, actively going out trying to find, whatever the issue is, don't get promoted a lot of times because either they are, shaking the boat more than they want it shaken, or they're looked at as kind of like a liability almost, right? If that
Yep.
makes
Yep.
sense, right? It's like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. And so I feel like that's part of the reason why they might look at it and be like, probably not the guy that's a little bit bigger than
Yep.
usual and has cauliflower ears.
That's what I was just about to say. Is that's precisely what I assumed was going on? Is that they look at it as a liability? Yeah, makes sense. Even though it doesn't make sense to you and I or
Well, yeah,
folks that
right.
are in our realm, but yeah.
Yeah. So about purple belt, I think is when purple belt's when I decided to start getting my life together and quit fighting, and became an iron worker. So I quit fighting full time and started training a lot with Carlson Gracie Jr. I went from being in the suburbs to training at his academy almost exclusively. Got really big in nogi competition, and I competed a little bit in judo too, but I didn't finish getting my black belt in judo. At least not yet. There's a really good guy here. I'm going to try to get my black belt from in judo. Um,
Real quick, Sam, I don't mean to cut you off. So purple
I'm sorry.
belt started getting real serious about you quit fighting. What time frame was that? I'm just curious in my own head.
It's 24 now. Got on with the police department in 17. Probably 13 or 15.
Okay, right on.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that together in my head, getting to
Yeah.
know you a little better.
No, so I wish I could tell you, but yeah.
Yeah, no biggie.
Yeah. So that year as a purple belt, I got bronze at gi pans, got silver no gi pans, and I remember, can't remember if it was that year or the next year. No, it was the next year. I got silver at Nogi Worlds, and then at brown belt, got double silver at Nogi Pans an adult, and made the flow grappling highlight reel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Dante Leone knee barred me in about a minute and a half, if that.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That was at Brown.
that was at Brown. Yeah, it was the finals of the absolute. I'd just beaten my nemesis, this guy named Matt Layton, who's a relatively good friend of mine now. Um, yeah, and then Dante went through inverted and got in on a knee bar, and the finals lasted probably about a minute.
Well, not that I want to see you, take that loss, but that yeah,
Oh, trust
Dante
me, I
Dante
think all my loss
Leon.
is super personal.
Yeah. Dante Leon, man, is a freaking beast, man. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
no,
out there. Yep, go
yeah,
ahead.
Dante's an animal, right? And he made a
He's
lot
from
of
Canada,
sacrifices.
isn't he? I think. I think he's down in the
Yeah, he's
United
from
States,
Canada.
but
All right, it's all right. It's all
yep.
right. Yeah, no, I lost to that Canadian.
He's
No,
different
and
though. He's a different Canadian.
yeah, right. I mean, he moved down to Detroit, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he
also to be
moved to the
fair,
US. He's different.
he saw the light. And also, I'm gonna give a shout out to where I'm from, Central Illinois. That's who he's affiliated under now. Is a gym that's based out of Central Southern Illinois, Pedigo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent gym.
So like that
Man.
that place is the Pedigo home gym's about an hour and a half south of where I grew up, about halfway between my house and my where my mom's family's from.
They're turning out some freaking juggernauts. Man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so like look at Jacob Couch. You know what I mean? Like I knew Jacob Couch when he was a purple belt because me and him would train together when he was living in Kentucky still.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jacob, man, I tell you, when I saw him win, was it
The
Pans or
East
was
Coast
it
Girls.
Worlds?
Well,
No, it was. No, it was when he won. And the thing about Jacob Couch, and I don't want to get to it, but this is good conversation. I mean, we're talking jujitsu, talking about things that matter to us, and a good percentage of our audience. But when he won that, man, the emotion just pumped me up, man. Seeing him, take his rash guard off, and how pumped he was, and he went around the crowd, and
yeah.
yeah, man, I got emotional over seeing that, man.
No, I mean, the thing is like Jake is such a great dude. You know, like I knew Jake when he was a purple belt, maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's whenever we were training together a lot, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you could tell he was special, right? And like, yeah, but he's and like the thing is like he's such an awesome guy, humble kid, right? And like, you ever see his post like, "Meemaw, we made it,"
Yeah.
and like he came up from absolutely nothing in
Yep.
Harlan. You think of like your stereotypical Appalachian. Yeah, I mean that
Yep.
was more or less what he came from, and now he's out here doing great things.
Competing at the top levels of black belt. Yeah, that's awesome,
Yeah,
buddy. So then after purple and brown, so you
yeah. So I got my black belt in 2019, 2018, or yeah, no, it was 2018. I think 2018 or 2019. I got my black belt. Um, I got my black belt after double silvering at Nogi Pans at Master One brown belt and getting silver at Nogi Worlds that year. I wrestled in the finals with a partially torn LCL from the match before.
ouch.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like, how many times are you going to wrestle for a world title, right?
Oh yeah, you're gonna do it anyway.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. Like, as long as I can, hobble out there, I'm going to try and get it in. Yeah, so I lost that match in the finals there, and then I've medaled once at Master Ones for black belt Nogi Worlds. Um,
Awesome. Man, that's
yeah,
legit, man.
yeah, and around that time, I've gotten married 5 years ago.
Okay.
My wife's in the background. um, Yeah, I got married in October of 19, and that's been a big change in my life. My ability to be able to focus on competing and going out and doing all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah.
So
So on top of that, the reason why there was a year gap in my competitive career as far as jiu-jitsu goes, I became a cop. I moved from Chicago down to Lexington, Kentucky, because I wanted to be a police and I wanted out of Illinois. And now I'm cop down in Lexington, Kentucky, working patrol, doing the Lord's work.
man, that's awesome. I say this to every police officer. Of course, some of my best friends are police officers, and it's mainly because we share this same path,
Yeah,
that we're all on. But also, you know, law enforcement, unfortunately, the political popularity now is to completely. It's getting maybe not as pronounced in the media as it was in 2020, but the treatment of law enforcement in the media by certain politicians is it's asinine, unbelievable. What you guys do for us, on the
yeah.
streets, keeping our
Well,
families safe. You know, go ahead.
so I mean, I've heard you say a bunch of times they could be a political podcast before you start getting political.
Yeah, yes. I'm
But
probably
no,
go ahead.
um, I mean, depending on what you think about the things that are going on right now, I think that with it being coming up on an election year, they will continue to have anti-police legislation, right? Or and so and sometimes like as a cop, I would say that like some legislation that like is anti-police, right? Like, is it anti-police or is it pro, for lack of a better word, freedom, right? Like, if you're making it hard for me to search a car, right, you're just upholding the Fourth Amendment, right? So like some stuff that's looked upon as like anti-police, I'm kind of like whatever, like it is
I,
what it is, right? These people
I'm
are going to be
good.
out doing the same. Yeah,
I'm good with protecting the Fourth Amendment. I'm
yeah,
absolutely on top of protecting all. I mean that's
yeah.
probably more important to me than the Constitution is so important. But go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, no. So I'm saying like some stuff that's like looked upon as like anti-police. I don't think it's necessarily like anti-police. I think some people just get like caught up in how it makes it their job harder. Mean their job harder instead of, all right, these are the new rules, right? Like so, like back whenever Marcelo was, competing, right? Reaping the knee wasn't illegal for a while there. Then all of a sudden, reaping the knee is illegal. Marcelo didn't give a fuck. He was out there still competing and just modified his technique, modified his approach, and he was out there, still winning everything, right? Like it, in my opinion, you just have to kind of adapt to the changes, right? And if it makes the job a little bit harder, that's fine. The only thing that like kind of irks me is like, especially with like the shoplifting stuff, right? Like in California, I'm sure you're aware of it. Um, but like anything that's not a felony amount of shoplifting, which is $1,000, which is hard to do at a stop and rob,
Yep.
is
They're not
non
prosecuting.
non enforceable. And then on top of that, like the way they look at reasonable use of force is absolutely mind boggling to me. You know what I mean? And while we want all cops to be some kind of super secret ninja who can you know handle a person who's got a knife without shooting them, the reality of it is it's very very hard, right? Like I spend more than the average anybody's amount of time spent training, right? And I'm telling you right now that it is very difficult to manage to not get stabbed and be able to put stopping shots on somebody. And not that's just putting stopping shots on them. It's not necessarily even about, disarming them without even hurting them, right? Like one of the drills we do a lot in my academy, because my academy is what we do, because like I don't want to, even though I'm super into it, I don't want them to get bogged down in the combatives aspect of it, because I want them to compete and do all the stuff that I did that I thought was fun when I was a little bit younger. Um, Usually at the end of the month, we'll have one person start with a marker. They can put it wherever they want on them, right? You start with in their hand, they can start with it in their belt, wherever. And they, all right, this is the position we've been working on. He can hit you and he can, mark you up with a marker. We're going to see what happens, right? And everybody gets marked up. You know what I mean? And it's funny whenever, it's me drawing a white belt, a dick on some white belt's forehead. But whenever it's me getting, cut across the throat, that ain't so funny, right? So, like, I think that, those things are important for you to realize just how dangerous it is, right? Like, there's no way, I think, not saying there isn't a way, but I don't think it is reasonable to expect an officer to handle somebody who's armed with a knife with anything but a pistol from distance, right? Because any other way, you're putting yourself at severe risk, right? Even though we may not have a choice in the, how the encounter unfolds, right? Maybe the knife comes out while we're grappling on the feet. Maybe we're in a crowded area where it's not, I don't have a good, background or foreground to shoot in, right? Like you're talking about, like Chuck Hager talks about in his course that I was listening to, right? But there's tons of reasons why we may not be able to have a choice, right? We might be in a confined area, right? And so it kind of irks me whenever they're like, oh, no, he could have definitely done something different. Like, what do you want us to do? Let chaos reign? Like,
well, Sam, I'd like to make a couple of comments.
I'm sorry if I rambled there.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. This is discussion, if you will. So that irks me too. And one of the biggest things that'll irk me is most of these individuals that are saying, well, he could have done this or she could have done that. Two avenues on it. Number one, I'll start with this, and then I'll finish my actual statement. They could just shoot him in the leg. Well, you mean use lethal force and expect that police officer to face using lethal force on the street? Oh, but you didn't mean to you weren't intending to kill him. That whole stupid adage that people have no clue that that's still using lethal force, and it's still a lethal force incident. But to the other point I was going to make is that the individuals that say they could have done this or that are individuals that have never been in that situation ever in their lives. And what I find funny is when you got media personnel that will say the same crap, and some of them have went out there and said, okay, I'll submit myself to being in a scenario. And what do? They, in a scenario, murder somebody.
Yeah.
So what's that again, Sam?
So, some innocent bystander just,
Yeah. So we know that it's easy to Monday morning quarterback police officers. When I say this all the time, 99% of the time, hundreds of thousands of interactions with police officers every single year. 99% of the time, it goes without incident. What other industry is there that awesome of a track record, right?
I mean, we're beating doctors, right?
Yeah,
and they get all the training.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, the other aspect of law enforcement that is so horrendous right now, and kind of some of what you were alluding to, is all of these big cities that are not enforcing and prosecuting violent crime. When you tell violent criminals that they're likely not to serve time, they're going to do more of it. Right? Go ahead.
Did you see a while back there was a case in Chicago? Two gangbangers were shooting at each other, right? And the DA dropped the case on the ground of mutual combat.
Yep, I saw that.
Yep.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm all for dueling making a comeback, but at the same time, let's have a set zone, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on the numbers, and I know I'm just preaching to the choir when I'm speaking to you, and you might have some different numbers on it, but I mean, let's just put it out there. I mean, depending on what numbers you look at between the FBI, UCR, which we know the UCR is volunteered information, so that information is on the low end. But let's just put an average on it right now. The last 2 years, violent crime, including murder, is up like at least 30%. If you look at the Bureau of Statistics, you're probably looking more like in the 40s somewhere. And I usually have these numbers in front of me, but violent crime is up drastically. And I would say one of the highest contributors to that is what we're talking about: the lack of enforcement of law, and the major reduction in law enforcement officers on the street. I mean, there's a lot of people just leaving, right?
So I'm a police officer in Lexington, Kentucky, and we're the second biggest state in Kentucky, which I know is not necessarily something to brag about, right? But we're still a relatively large city. I think we got 500,000 or something like that.
Pretty big city.
Yeah, all right, it's a big city. We're the 26th largest city east of the Mississippi. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. I'll tell you that backstory in a second here. So, yeah, whenever people know there isn't much consequence for their actions, why not do whatever you want, right? Like,
Yeah, and that's clearly what's going on. And then they also know that cops aren't going to catch them on. I mean, we also know
and
that.
like the other thing too is like, right, like back to the police officer's reasonable expectation use of force, right? On top of like every officer that stood the line in 20, right? They know how miserable that is. And, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, I understand why everybody was frustrated, but imagine sitting there getting pelted with water bottles, spit
Or
at,
ice bottles, even in some
Yeah,
cases.
so we had a couple ice bottles, but it was
Mm,
more piss Gatorade bottles and
mm.
just water bottles and, actual stuff that could hurt you. That being said, I ain't trying to get pissed on,
Yeah.
right?
Oh no. Bodily
Um,
fluids. They don't
yeah, right.
bode well.
You know, I'm just glad it wasn't semen. Um, so yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience, right? But in the back of our minds, a lot of guys think to themselves, I think that like if he wants to run, it ain't worth me catching him and possibly getting involved in the shooting and us having to watch our city burn.
Yep.
Right? You know, and I mean, I'm not saying it's entirely wrong, but I am saying is that I don't think if there isn't a change about that in the attitudes of law enforcement officers
Mhm.
in the near future, the city's going to burn. It's just going to burn differently.
Well, and then correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of law enforcement officers out there that will get certain calls, and I don't think I want to take that call. And it could be, medium chance that it's a possible.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's always been the case, right? There's always been um, officers that didn't want to necessarily do the right thing because it does put them at risk. Okay, right? Like even before 2020, right? The what was the Parkland shooting in Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Right, there was an officer there that there wasn't anybody stopping him from going in and stopping that shooter. Right. While Uvalde was a little bit different because they were told, like, commanded to step back. Right. Um, but there was nobody stopping him. He just decided that it's safe for me to stay out here, so I'm going to stay out here.
Yeah, and I don't. So Sam, I don't mean to cut you off, buddy. I feel bad.
Not at all.
So and this is just my thoughts on the Parkland law enforcement officer. Maybe I'm wrong in the thinking. I think my thought on that is that he was not willing to put himself on the line. That's my thoughts, is that he wasn't willing to put himself on the line and risk going in that school. And at that point before Parkland, am I incorrect in this, that the SOP was to, well, no, don't let me speak out of line. Go ahead.
So I'm not sure. I know that there was a big change in, SOPs, TTPs, whatever you want to call them, after Columbine. I know that was one of the big ones we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember there being any change in it now, but I remember when I was going through the academy, it would, one of the things, if we had an active killer, active shooter, was that thing is going to last, somewhere between 1 and 5 minutes, more or less. So it's probably going to take you at least 2.5 minutes to get there. So by the time you're there, you have to get in there and make sure it doesn't go any further. Otherwise, he's going to keep on killing. So it was very much so like, ideally, you have 2 people with you, right? 2 or more. But if not, you're going to go in and give the best traffic, radio traffic you can, and try and search out, where he is. Is always very much so a, stop the killing, and then we can figure out everything else after that.
Yeah, and forgive me, I always try to be careful that because I'm not law enforcement. And I kind of understand some of the TTPs or SOPs just from my good brothers that are, or sisters that are law enforcement. So yeah, I want to make sure I wasn't feigning that I know what and departments change. SOPs change from department to department and state to state, right?
And after Uvalde, we had another conversation about it as well, but I don't remember there being any difference really between what they said after Uvalde and what our stuff was before then. They just put an extra emphasis on us going in and finding out what's going on.
Yep. That did seem to be what I felt like there was a slight motivation and mindset change on it or something.
So from some of the stuff I've read and seen on Uvalde was they thought it had turned from an active shooter into a hostage situation, and that slowed down their response. I mean, if they think they have a chance to bargain their way out of it, right, it's not necessarily the wrong answer, but sometimes it is, right? And so that was part of the reason why they said there was such a delayed response to Uvalde, was they thought it turned from an active shooter to a hostage situation. But I don't know if that's what was actually going on, or if that chief was just a little bit timid, because it seemed like everything I read was that the chief was holding his officers.
Are we talking about Parkland or Uvalde?
Uvalde.
Okay. Now, so see, I'm personally, we've had discussions, and not that this was intended to be part of the discussion, but there's just so much more that can be done in schools as far as hardening, as far as better tactics on the school themselves, hardening doors. There's all kinds of things. I can go on and on about that. And my beliefs, just from a tactical standpoint, thinking of how things can be done differently. And I also know that one of the things I want to see is there's plenty of retired law enforcement officers and military that would be glad to be plainclothes armed personnel in schools. I just wish that we could get some folks behind that. Go ahead.
So I recently turned down an opportunity to be the SRO, school resource officer, at a neighboring county. They wanted me to come in and be the wrestling coach and the SRO, but I don't know. It just wasn't. It's not for me right now. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But the other side of that is, I don't think people like that, right? I think that what you're talking about, like kind of like crime prevention through design, right? Hardening of structures. I think that's more the direction that would be appealing to people
Yep.
than them actually having, plain clothes, Rambo running around.
Yeah, and I think that that's a responsibility. I don't think it should be just anybody. I'm not even talking about
Yeah,
just any law enforcement officer or any military personnel. I think that person should have a high level of training. But to your point, I'd be very glad to see hardening of schools.
yeah.
When
I think
you go ahead.
that's the answer we need to look towards because
Ingress and egress control,
yeah,
freaking bullet resistant doors, all that would be an awesome move in the right direction. Well, cool. Well, Sam, I think let's move into some of your combatives
yeah. Sorry,
experience.
we got off on a tangent there, huh?
No, it's man. This is what this show's about, man. It's about self protection. All these subjects are important, and you know policies on law enforcement, use of force, policies in school protection, all that, man, is right up our alley. So no big deal at all. So number one, I met you at the Combative Summit, and I had heard about you before then. I certainly had, and it was a pleasure to meet you. And I'm just bummed that I did not get to take your module, but believe me, I'm a man of my word. I find it in when I know that I want to take a class. Oh, if it takes me hosting you, that's going to happen. But as far as first off, um, the Combative Summit, some audience members, man, I'm tired of hearing about this Combative Summit. I'm sorry,
Well, you're
folks.
missing it.
If you aren't ready to get to the Combative Summit by the next time that it comes around, we're doing our best to get folks in the door. It was an unbelievable event. But your thoughts on it, man, on the summit itself?
It was great, right? A bunch of people that I had never had the chance to train with, right? But I knew by reputation and their material they put out were there. I didn't get to train with Jerry Wetzel. I think Jerry puts out great stuff. The person that I was most excited to meet that I didn't know already, right, was Cliff Byerly.
Oh yeah.
Cliff cracks me up, man. I like to think him as a little sawed off John Wayne. Um, yeah, but no, I had a great time. I got to hang out with Cliff a little bit. He didn't necessarily hang out with us, quite as much as I'd liked, but he was there with his wife, so he had to, take care of the missus. But I got to take his bit on vehicle extractions and fighting inside of vehicles.
Yeah,
It
we
was
were
good.
in that class. We were in that class together, weren't we?
Yeah,
Yeah. That's right.
yeah,
Really good.
yeah. And I got to train with a guy named Wes Copeland, who I enjoy talking to online now. Yeah, it was a good class, bunch of good guys there. I think that as great as the training value is at these bigger events, the real treasure is the friends you make along the way.
Oh, and in all seriousness, man, that
But
is,
I said it like sarcastically, but at the
yeah.
same time, right? Like, there's lots of guys there that I made contact with. Wes is saying he's going to have me down to hog hunt next year.
Cool.
And there's another guy who I'm supposed to go down to Florida and possibly do a gator hunt with, and I'm all fired up about that.
Well, it is absolutely, when you go to an event like that, and I would argue that I'm just going to compare the two, TACCON versus Combative Summit. TACCON, unbelievable. Just an awesome event. The Combative Summit was on the same realm, but in some of the areas that folks need even more. Then I need to be careful what I say, because man, we got a lot of, man. I'm a range master certified instructor myself. Um, TACCON is an unbelievable event. I'll just put it this way: Combative Summit was the TACCON of combatives, and I'm looking forward to it again. The point is when you come to an event like either TACCON or the Combative Summit, the people that self-select into events like that, they're most awesome people on the face of the planet, man. And to folks that arrived at the Combative Summit, man, there were so many, the clientele in the event itself, there were a ton of professionals in their own right.
Yeah.
Just the client base was incredible. Dave
Matt
Boone.
Frankel was there.
Yeah, yeah,
Matt Frankel took my class.
yeah.
Like,
Man, that's cool. I didn't get to talk to him. I
yeah,
didn't
I
know
got to
he
talk to
did
him a
take it.
little bit.
So what did he think of your class? Did he?
He liked it. I mean, like, him and Craig were talking. We talked a little bit, but I wasn't going to interrupt his and Craig's conversation. So I was kind of there just third wheeling.
I
Yeah, I
did
mean, like,
some of
we got
that
to talk a
too.
little bit about it. Yeah. Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
and are you tracking that Matt is like 35,
yeah,
40 minutes from me?
that's what I was
And
hearing.
yeah, and he and I just haven't hooked up yet again. Now, I started coaching the Daybreakers
You know,
again
mhm.
at my jiu-jitsu gym, and I'm going to invite him out for the morning class one of these coming weeks. And because man, I'm trying to he told me I could help him with his jiu-jitsu, and he said he'd help me with my shooting. So I'm like, I'll take that. And Matt, if you're out there listening, I know you have several times.
Well,
Let's get
he's
this.
probably
Let's
on
get this.
Instagram Live right now.
He had Chris Lapre on just the other
Mhm.
night. Good friend of
I think
mine.
he was.
Another. Go ahead.
I mean, last I saw him, he was going live with Stoker.
Oh yeah, I hadn't seen
I
what
mean,
he's
like, I
done
mean,
in the
he was
last.
live with Stoker relatively commonly.
Yeah, yeah, but I definitely am going to get him out to my jiu-jitsu gym, and I'm going to try to get some of that help on the range too. So cool. Yeah. So speaking of you, so what was your block of instruction
Oh,
at the Combatives
yeah.
instructor? Let's talk about that.
Um. So my block of instruction was John had some nice way of saying it, but basically was pinning in a weapons based environment. So one of the things like I think about as far as like combatives, right, especially like from a law enforcement perspective, is that people don't pull out a weapon when they think they're going to win the fight or get away, right? And once I'm pinning somebody, they got an idea they're going to have to go to drastic measures to get out of it, right? So whenever I have somebody pinned, right, that's when they're most likely to try and go for the weapon, in my opinion. So because I wanted to, have really good pinning, right? A, because it's better for me to help take somebody into custody, and B, I'm not trying to, get shot, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, so my block was pinning in a weapons based environment, and it's all about, after that initial contact, right? We get them down, however it was, whatever takedowns as you like, right? Then we're going to either hold them down till our wives and kids gets in the car, or backup arrives, or whatever it was, right? So those are kind of the two environments thing about pinning being really important is, right, I'm out with my wife and my kids, so I got to hold somebody down till they can get in the car and then we can drive away, or so that they can find whatever the safe place for them is. And then for, law enforcement officers, being able to pin somebody until their backup arrives or whatever's in, or until they want to know how they work in like somebody in the cuffs. Um, so it was a bunch of different pinning methods or pins, control positions, whatever you want to call it, right? That restrict their access to both your weapons and their own weapons. And one of the things I was focusing on was being able to use these, I call them frisking positions, right? So I got a frisking position, the stockade. Um, if you watch UFC 100, it's what Brock Lesnar used against Frank Mir. He was just striking from it. But I
Yeah,
used
yeah.
that a lot because um, then I would go through, frisk them, run their pockets, make sure they didn't have a weapon, right? And the reason why that started to become like a real hot topic for me outside of me thinking it's good stuff is there was one time where I had to wrestle a guy into cuffs, and whenever I was searching him afterwards, he had a fucking, gun appendix.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, glad that didn't go south, right?
Yeah.
You know, it was after a foot pursuit, and I'd so I'd gotten on his back during the foot pursuit. Um, so I was in a decent position, but like after I finished getting him in cuffs, there's a gun. That's not a happy surprise.
Right.
And there's been another time where I was cuffing a guy up. Right, we were wrestling him into cuffs. Gun fell out of his pants. You know what I mean? And I was able to kick it away, but there's tons of reasons why you need to be able to. You can't count on this just being a oh my god, like I hit a beautiful duck under, right? I'm going to draw my pistol, right? Sometimes these fights are going to take longer, right? It's going to take a little bit longer to justify being able to shoot somebody, right? And more importantly, too, I'm sure that you know, the most important thing, right, is like if I can avoid killing an American my entire life,
Yep.
that'd be great, right? And so if I slow things down, work through these different frisking positions, and make sure that he doesn't have a gun, so that I'm safe first off, right? And then he's not wrestling over a gun, and we're putting rounds into all the neighboring trailers, at 115 loud, and so we got make sure we're safe, and then as we're safer, the community's safer, right? Because we're making sure they can't access their weapons.
Yeah, and I think I saw a little bit of the introductory content that Aaron Janetti posted
Yeah,
on his Instagram.
yeah. Janetti's a good buddy of mine. He lives just a couple hours from me, so we try and get together every month or two to train.
I'm sure I think he listens to our show sometimes too. Aaron, if you're listening out there, brother, it's been the day job that has kept me from being able to settle down some time to have you here. But I plan, to you,
Well,
Sam, I plan on having him here in North Carolina at some point, as soon as I can.
why don't you? I mean, we're on. If he's gonna go through from Ohio, he's got to go through Kentucky to get to North Carolina, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
We can have a
perfect.
twofer.
Exactly. No, that'd be perfect, Sam. I'd love that, man. Yeah, I certainly want to get a little more nuance. I certainly have a few things that I try to go for when I'm pinning somebody, and I want to keep them from accessing a weapon or being able to access my own.
So,
I go ahead.
so I think about it very similar to how Craig thinks about it, right? So instead of thinking about me taking the back, I'm thinking about arm bundling because it's much easier for him to get back to his feet and be more dangerous to me, whether he's armed or unarmed, if he's on his feet, right? It's much easier to keep somebody pinned if they're on their back than to keep them held down out there and referees their turtle, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, what else was I gonna say with that? So, like, I think about bundling the limbs, right? But instead of having a free access, with one hand to get a pistol out, I'm using that hand that would be accessing my pistol to go through and frisk them, right? It's the exact same concepts, more or less, that Craig teaches, minus the back takes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very similar to what Craig teaches. Bundling arms, two with his two arms and one of mine, so I have a free hand. But instead of it being, we're in a more dynamic position like he would be on the feet, I've got him pinned, so I have time to go through and frisk him and make sure he doesn't have a weapon.
Nice, nice. It seemed like I saw some kind of some modified Kessa positions,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe
So
some sit out reverse Kessas as well.
yeah, so um, in the academy, right? They always told me that you never want to go to the ground. There's going to be multiple attackers, and they're going to have a gun. You're going to be wrestling on a bed of heroin needles, right? And all that stuff, right? And there have definitely been, trailers and houses I've been in that have been like, I'll just tase you and drag you out because there's like littered needles everywhere in that house and trailer. So that is when they said, right? But the reason why they tell you not to pin is because you don't want them to be able to produce a weapon. And I think that, well, I'm pinning him so he can't produce the weapon, right? So I have an answer for that whenever I was in the
Mm-hmm.
academy now. And then the other one was multiple attackers, right? So the way I teach my my blocks is we'll do the first bit. We'll do kind of just a straight 1v1, right? Where I've got all my classic pins from Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, right? But I'll show the modifications I make from them to the weapons based environment, like controlling more at the elbows and forcing his arms up towards his ears, and how I can do that, and then how I can first from there make sure he doesn't get a weapon out, right? And if he does get a weapon out, how we want to react to it, stuff like that. And then the next thing I said was multiple attackers. Somebody's going to sneak up and boot you in the head, right? So we do the next evolution that we do, or I think Janetti wanted me to call them escalations now. So the next escalation is that we are going to focus on pinning somebody, but moving around him back and forth, right, and being able to track a third party who may or may not be involved, right? So like we'll start off pinning somebody in classic side control, right, and somebody will come into the room, and you have to. He'll show two fingers, right, and then you'll switch, and you'll have to follow, like you maybe go to reverse Kesa, you go to regular Kesa, north south. You'll kind of work your way through several different pins as you're doing that, right? Yeah, and so I can't talk about my like around the world drill, but that's a drill that Paul Sharp showed me, and he showed it from standing, but I mean, if I'm going to take his idea, I got to give him credit for it, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
I had not seen. Well, maybe I had, but what it reminds me of, and some of, and I'm like, man, that's a great way to look at it. And I don't remember what my older jiu-jitsu instructor called it, where I got my blue belt. It's many years ago. I always tell that story. It took me it took me 11 years to go from blue to purple. But anyway, so my former instructor, it was just a way to teach the main positions, and it was similar to that. It was like doing around the world in the various positions. And when I saw some of what you were doing, it did remind me slightly of that, but with completely in the context of the weapons environment. So I thought, man, that's
So
a great way to look at it.
yeah. So I mean, whenever I think about combatives, right? What separates combatives from sport jiu-jitsu? Weapons and the possibility of multiple attackers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I want to be able to take as close as I can to my game for sport jiu-jitsu, right? And it looked just as much like my MMA game as my combatives game, right? I want to have techniques that are going to overlap and work well in all three of those, right? And on that same topic, you're going to have slightly different ways you're going to modify things for each rule set you fight under, right? Like I'm not going to grapple the same way in the IBJJF I would in a sub-only tournament, and I'm not going to grapple the same way, in a league that allows up kicks as I would a league that doesn't, right? So there's always slight modifications you have to make to the technique, right? But I want people to, whenever they see me in a grappling match, think, man, it looks like that fight I saw for 10 years ago. And I want them to then think, whenever they're watching me at Evolution, be like, shit, like he's doing almost the exact same thing. Sure, there's modifications and differences between all three of them, right? Because all three of the things have different goals, right? But they should be able to look at them and say, man, I see how he has translated his jiu-jitsu perfectly between all three areas of the triangle, right? Sport jiu-jitsu, self-defense combatives, whatever you want to call it, and then, sport fighting.
Nice.
And so that's what I really think a lot about.
Well, Sam, I can't wait to take that block of instruction from you, buddy. Absolutely. It's going to happen, and it's going to have to happen soon. I'm looking forward to it. So with that note, right? So you had all this experience in mixed martial arts, boxing, jiu-jitsu, and correct me if I get this wrong. So you had a lot of that going on, but there was at some point a transition to where you started focusing on like, hey, I got to focus on this weapons based entanglement
Yeah.
piece. And what was the impetus behind that? When did that
Uh,
happen?
so one of them was after I found a gun in a guy's pockets. You remember his appendix whenever I was searching him after getting him in cuffs. And then the other, it's very easy to take something as a one-off, right? And then I was talking to my good buddy Joe Schiff, who's now an Oregon State Trooper. That same story, right? He had some guy, try and run past him, right? They ended up wrestling for a little bit, fighting for a little bit, and then afterwards, we ended up finding a gun in his hoodie pocket, and it's like we should probably start doing this stuff, right? And I reached out to Larry because I knew Larry was hooked up into it, and I had a little bit of exposure to it, but nothing really seriously. He's like, and then also another one of my friends, Artie, who's one of Paul Sharp's. I think he's a brown belt now, but Paul Sharp's moved off. He's like, well, why don't you come to train with Paul for the day? He's got some class going on. I was like, all right, I'll show up. And it ended up being MDoc, and I took the MDoc
Nice.
course. Yeah.
It's a legit class, man.
Oh, no, it definitely is. I just wish I'd had a better setup for it. So I didn't get scheduled off the night before. And
yeah, you told me this. I want to hear it again, though. Go ahead.
I got off work at 2 a.m. and I had to be in Elgin, Illinois, which is a 6.5 hour drive at 8 a.m. for class. So I managed to make it like 30 hours of no sleep and got through the whole thing. Paul, he was like, man, like, I kind of wanted to go wake you up when you're sleeping in the parking lot, but luckily you woke up because I was debating on about just letting you sleep. I knew how tired you were. But yeah, I went and took a nap in the parking lot, went and got me a gyro at some, Greek place up the road and went back and just sat in my car and slept.
Sam, I tell you, man, the reason I'm laughing is I hadn't done that exact thing, but I've absolutely been, like there's been some times where I hosted Craig where, I'd have friends come in town or my brother, that was taking the class and just, hosting's a huge undertaking, in many cases. So there's a lot of times when I was hosting Craig and I was training too, man. I wasn't just hosting,
Yeah.
where I didn't get much sleep, man. And so it kind of, once you go through courses like that on very little sleep, it makes it a little more realistic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a third shift cop, so it seems like I will go a couple weeks off sleeping like, 4 to 5 hours a day, and then I'll just knock out for the next 24 hours and my wife won't see me and I'll just sleep the whole time. So I think that 4 to 5 hours of sleep is very operationally realistic.
Yeah, yeah, and let's get back to your transition in a weapons based environment grappling. But I'm curious about this for you because I know how hard it is for me to shift in and out of different sleeping patterns. It's like especially if I deploy overseas, of course, it's a different thing altogether when you shift time zones. But when you're weekly going through your normal shift work, do you try to kind of sleep a similar pattern the next day, or do you kind of shift where like, hey man, I got this time during the day, I'm gonna kind of sleep later in the evening? How does that work for you? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, right. There's always overtime that's needing to be worked. I've got core all the time too. Um, the way I do it whenever I manage to have a week that I don't have, you know, first shift overtime or court or something like that. Um, left to my own devices, I'll stay up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning every night, and then I'll sleep till noon to 2, somewhere in there. And then, my usual shift is 22 to 08, and I'll sleep till 2 to 4, depending on like how long I was up. Like usually there's a lot of times my first day back to work, I'll work, because I live a little bit outside the town I work in, where I'll end up working basically, I'll be up for 24 hours straight by the time it's said and done, right? So like tomorrow I have court at 8:30, so I got to go to bed here soonish, sometime in the next hour or two. So I got court at 8:30, and then I won't get off till 8 a.m. tomorrow. So unless I manage to catch a little nap in the middle, and tomorrow's supposed to be my range day, I'm going to just kind of be up for 24 hours.
Yeah, back in the day as a soldier, man, I pulled a lot of those. I mean,
Yeah.
there were times where I pulled 48 hours straight, or longer.
Yeah.
Um,
So
it-
I'm lucky. I haven't had to go quite that far. Like I've done, a couple 36s, but never 48.
now when I say 48, of course there was a 20-minute cat nap here and there, but no real sleep for 48 hours, man. It was freaking miserable, especially if I'm not trying to talk about me. But
Oh, that's
if
good.
I get a trouble call and be on a Black Hawk, or I'd sit in an ADAC somewhere, I'm trying to get a chopper ride or a C-130 somewhere. And, once I finally got a flight, to whatever, fob I was going to, I might have been up, like get there and still have to jump in and do the work, so
Yeah.
I don't miss those days at all, brother. But anyway, back to you, man. So we got past that. That was my curiosity, how because again, I'm asking those questions because of what I
Yeah.
dealt with in the past. But
Well, so
back, go ahead.
yeah, as long as I'm up by 2, and I don't really miss any family time, right? Because
Good, good.
yeah, like that's part of the reason why I went third shift, right? Was because at the time I didn't know if I had enough seniority to work first shift, but I wanted to coach my son's wrestling team whenever he was wrestling, and
Nice.
practice for wrestling was from 3:30 to 5:30, and so I couldn't work first or second shift. So third shift was the only option for me, and I ended up really liking it. And as long as I'm up by 2, which is 6 hours sleep isn't bad. It's not necessarily the best, but it's plenty. I can still pick the boys up from school and do all that stuff that I want to do.
Man, that's awesome. It does sound like that's a good setup for you, man. And that does sound good. So back to the weapons based entanglement piece. So you were you started working with both Paul and Larry, but again the impetus was, hey, you found some damn weapons, and in an entangled, you know engagement with some bad guys, and so you're like, hey, I gotta get better at this, is basically what it sounds like.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And so you kind of thought of the problem at this point. Had you been, and I'm not trying to draw things back to ECQC, that's not my intent,
Oh no,
but at
so
this
I
point,
had
had you been to ECQC at that point?
no, my first ECQC was 20.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, right. Like I've been through MDoc and done a couple other combatives courses before then, but 20, and then I think I hit, it was either 19 or 20. I think it was 20.
Well,
And
my
then I hit
guess,
19,
go
20,
ahead.
21, 22 for ECQC, and then last year I hit EWO, because I try to make it a point to. I make it a point every year I'm going to train with Craig at least once, ideally twice. Yeah, I mean, it's just whether or not that works out with family life, trying to compete, and everything else that I do. But every year, come hell or high water, I'm going to be training with Craig once a year, right? Because Craig's my coach, no different than Junior's my coach.
Yeah, not nice. And I see it this way, and maybe, and again, this is you and I talking. I'm curious about all these things myself, but it sounded to me like you had some of the epiphanies that some cops or some civilians or whatever military would have in an ECQC prior to your first ECQC, though. Correct? I
Yeah,
mean, you know, the entangled fight became a problem you saw that you say, hey, I gotta I gotta look this problem and think of ways that I'm going to be able to solve it right. So ECQC wasn't. I'm sure you still had an excellent time and had a learning experience in it, but I think you came to it from having already understood the problem. So I'm
yeah.
curious how that transition took place for you.
So I mean, me and my buddies already played around a little bit, but at the time, the guy that like was running the practices like that I was primarily going to, right? He's a pretty good sport jiu-jitsu guy, but at the same time, he he did not like the idea like I would fuck around and like cuff the white belts. You know what I mean? Like we had a white belt who's a buddy of mine, Brian Osborne, and I would get bored, you know, and just torture him and start cuffing him with it. I would tie his hands behind his belt, behind his back with his belt, and that coach did not think it was funny, even though Brian and me thought it was funny. And yeah, so if I was to have brought in a SIRT pistol or you know, one of my Glock paintball guns, he would not have liked that.
Ah,
And so, you know, but I'm over to a different place. He's on a different team now, and I'm able to focus a lot more on the combatives.
cool. Yeah, and my coach, he used to do a lot of the, you know, the sock P, and he was one of the coaches
Yeah,
out
yeah, yeah.
here at the
You
unit,
told me that. Mm-hmm.
and so he has. I mean, he doesn't mind me plugging in weapons in my
Yeah,
when I
you know.
coach, and he does a lot of it himself. But if
So
Lee's out there listening, we still got to do our collaboration, Lee.
well, I think that it kind of blows my mind. Like I can understand, like we don't do combatives. We do combatives like you know, 1 week a month at my gym, which is, you know, definitely more than most gyms do,
Yep.
right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
I would,
absolutely.
and but like if nothing else, is a training variant, right? Like, you know, there's stuff that I use in combatives that I started to use more because of combatives that I've used in jiu-jitsu matches, right? A lot of like my focus on the 2-on-1 on escaping bad positions that came out of me, you know, definitely Craig helped me out with it a lot, right? But I would use that 2-on-1 to get out of bottom in a weapons based environment. You know what I
Man,
mean?
I absolutely love the 2-on-1 for all kinds of applications, man. That's
Yeah.
a very good point. Folks need to really add that to their game, even in just pure jujitsu.
Oh well, I mean, so like for me, right? Like I think I talked about it briefly earlier. I think about jiu-jitsu as kind of three equal sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got combative self-defense, sport jiu-jitsu. There's my finger again. uh, yeah,
I
well,
point all the time.
yeah.
I use my
But yeah,
pen
so
a
we got
lot
three
too.
equal sides, right? Of the triangle. Um, sport jiu-jitsu, sport fighting, combative self-defense is the third side, right? And you got to figure out what moves are going to work the best between all three of them, right? Like I think that you know, going to a 2-on-1 probably not the right answer in an MMA fight, but there are times where going to a 2-on-1 is 110% the right answer in a combative situation.
Oh yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? So like I think that you need to be well rounded in all three areas and be able to work it out, right? Because, one thing that you thought was like worthless, right? Like whenever I was fighting MMA, one of my coaches we were playing a bunch of spider guard, and I'd show up and take the gi class while I was warming up for my MMA practice or whatever it was, and we were drilling spider guards. I drilled spider guard, right? And at the time I was like, man, this is kind of stupid, right? Like I'm getting ready for an MMA fight, whatever. But now that I am gotten bigger into combatives, I've been able to use some spider guard type stuff and
Yeah.
defending weapons and just kind of that dexterity you develop. Like I used to do Red Man every year for our academy, and like there was a couple times where I'd be playing guard and guys would be trying to get their weapon out, and I'd be able to lasso their arm off the weapon and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and be able to do stuff like that from spider guard that you don't think about necessarily being as being purely a sport technique, but I was able to find a usefulness for it in combatives.
Yeah, that spider guard modified properly for the weapons based environment is one of the most important guards that in my opinion. And yeah, it is interesting you bring up the dexterity piece of spider guard. It's absolutely an important thing that folks need to plug in weapons with and see
Yeah, right. Well, I
see
mean,
what
and then
comes out. And go ahead.
yeah, I think that that's the thing, right? We got to do a whole lot of fucking around still to figure out what the right thing to do is for some of this stuff, right? Like, you think of how many people have been fighting without, like fighting MMA for us to come across like, all right, this is a good winning strategy consistently, right? I think there's just as much of that needing to be done still in combatives, right? We still need to be going through and figuring out stuff. I understand that, like, Alexander the Great's guys, they were doing combatives, they were doing, proto MMA or pancration, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So I think that there's a whole lot of stuff that still need to be doing and figuring out, right? And there's no way to find these things out but to fuck around, right? We got to get, or either, I use a paintball Glock gun or a sim gun, shock knife. If you have one, I don't think shock knives are as necessary because usually that kind of, the shock knife I have at least, you almost have to start with it out or it's kind of a pain in the ass compared to just using a marker or a knock knife.
Yeah, and I've said this multiple times. I know I'm beating a dead horse sometimes. I love Sims. It's obviously it's one of the awesome tests, but we're trying to preach to folks, man. Just grab your blue guns or your red guns and your freaking trainer knives and plug it into your practice fights. And
Yeah.
it's 90 to 95% the validity of running Sims.
Yeah.
It's so
I mean,
valuable.
I think that Janetti has a good thing to say about it, right? Um, he likens shock knives and sim guns to super hard sparring, right?
Hmm.
And I think there's something to be said for that, right?
Yeah.
Like we probably didn't do as much of as we should have whenever I was coming up through the ranks in boxing and Thai boxing, but there's a lot to be said for having kind of lighter sparring, right? Blue guns, knock knives, and then there's something to be said for, yeah, all right, so we've done this at this level. Now we need to take it back up to the sim guns, right? And I think Cliff really pushes the sim guns, and then I think that and it's great, right? Like I'm all for it. And then I think that Ben, while he will bust out the other guns, I think he is much more appreciative of just throwing out the blue gun or the red
Mm.
gun, whatever it is that you like.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that is one of the aspects of combatives that we just need to keep preaching and preaching and preaching. Is that
So
it's
like,
quite all right to just plug in the blue gun,
as long as they, you've put in the work and all that stuff, right?
and you're being
Um,
honest about it too.
yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think that like that's what the sim guns provides is honesty,
Yeah, and
right?
and one of the things you've probably heard us talk about I mean, we have the capabilities to use UTM. I've got the license now. It's becoming more difficult now. Um, but I mean, I still love in a lighter version. We're trying to in what we're doing, and I'm being careful that I make things about what we're doing. But even just having a cert pistol that has the laser
Yeah.
makes
So
people is valuable as well. Go ahead.
it is. And we roll with the Sir pistol a lot. I mean, I think I've lost my front side got knocked off wrestling over it actually.
So
Um,
can I stop you there for a second? Because I have a story. I used my personal cert in when we hosted Cecil for his class in Tulsa, and one of the evos, and this is on me. I never even once thought about it. My personal cert has a real um tritium sight on it, and I use that in one of the evos. And of course, myself and one of the other guys were wrestling over my gun at some point, and I get up after the evo, and I'm dripping blood everywhere. I'm like, what the hell? And my hands were freaking
nice.
destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, lesson learned right there, man. Don't use real sights on your, in those types of situations. But
Especially if you're using those
anyway,
like lesser height sights for your
so listen, Sam, we're getting close to what we normally, close shows out at about an hour and a half. Because I mean, I'm already seeing we need to have you back on, like we talked on off the air. So I want to make sure though. So we talked about your weapons based environment and what led you to that. Um, is there anything else you want to hit on that real quick before I go to my next kind of more jovial question?
No, so the date isn't officially set in stone because I gotta get it off of work
Oh,
yet. But
thank you.
yeah,
It's
so
right in my notes. Yeah. So
it's
let
all
me
good.
frame it. Let me frame it because man, that's another issue I have. It's right here in my notes here. So yeah, Sam. So you have some upcoming events. Yeah. So let's talk about those and hit on those. Go ahead.
Yeah. So mid March is what we're thinking. I think March 19th. It's kind of got to work around some other schedules still. But I'm going to be up in Chicago. I'm going to be teaching seminar, one in the South Burbs and one in the city for grappling a weapons-based environment. I'd be teaching a jiu-jitsu seminar as well at my friend Bender's gym in the city, but it's not all the way ironed out yet because I need to get my leave approved. But that's what we're going with right now. It's either going to be, mid to late March or one of the first 2 weeks of April.
Okay.
Got to get into war turkey season.
So yeah. So what I'll say whenever you get those dates ironed out, let me know what they are, and
Yeah, I'll tell you.
we'll start talking about it on the air, and then we can also have you back on to talk about it even more because we still
It'd be
got some
great.
other stuff to talk about. But I'll absolutely, start hitting on that for you just because we want to support you, and we'll throw that on some show notes too, and all of that. So very very cool, Sam. I think I think you have a lot to offer. Um, I don't know how young you are, but you're a fairly young man compared to me. I think. It's kind of what Craig talks about sometimes about Aaron being another example. Is that you young guys like yourself and Aaron and a few of the other guys out there are going to be the folks that carry the mantle for this for many many years to come. Because guys like me, I'm not as old as Craig. Craig's still doing really well, and
Just
I'm
go ahead and
shit.
rub that in.
I'm an amateur when it comes to. I mean, I can't hold a candle
No,
to.
all I got out of that conversation was Craig, you're old as dirt.
Craig listens sometimes. I might text him after this, say, "Hey, if you hear me, I'm sorry, Craig. Don't kick my ass." But no, I'm sitting there, on a serious note. Craig he's been saying, "Yeah, I can't do this forever."
Well, and he's got Brian there, and Brian's phenomenal.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
Brian is he's fairly young too, man, and of course, top level black belt under Andre Gavon, Atos Jiu Jitsu, and, and man, obviously he understands this weapons based environment. Yeah, young guys like you, Brian, Aaron
Eddie,
Janetti.
Valentine.
Oh, why would I not bring up John? John is John
It's all right.
Valentine,
I'm
man.
gonna let him know you forgot about him. You're gonna be on the hit list, buddy.
I am. Yeah,
Yeah,
John is a
and
juggernaut. Mhm.
and another instructor thing we didn't mention, who I better mention before he finds me somewhere, is Cole Miller, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah, I mean, I
really
think that
really enjoyed his class.
the walls and weapons class was great. That's one of the classes I got to take. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if I'm necessarily what Craig thinks I am, but I think that Valentine, Janetti, Brian, I think that between the five of us, hopefully we can keep this ship moving forward and moving on
Oh,
up.
oh, I know you guys will, and again, I think that more of what we're trying to contribute is making sure that this message is out there more and more. Craig says it all. He doesn't need advertisement, but we like trying to drive home the message of
Yeah,
this combatives community, and man, what John did with the summit, and he being the he's a good marketer too. John's just a good hearted person, man. So we got
John's
and frankly, I think I'm trying to remember who I had this conversation with. I'll be honest, I don't remember who it was, but I really do believe that there is a change in the wind when it comes to combatives. And, it's like that what we spoke about earlier is that there's probably about 10,000 people that are very, very serious about training. There's less people that are very, very serious about combatives. But I think that is changing.
yeah.
And I think it's
Well,
because, go ahead.
yeah, I'd be really curious to know. I think they said there was 22,000 competitors at Masters Worlds 2022.
What was the number?
I think they said it was 20,000 or something like that
Wow.
between
Okay.
between Masters Worlds and Jiu Jitsu Con or something
Nice.
silly like that. Yeah, it was like I might have the number wrong.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that then I want to know how many registered shooters there are for the USPCA and stuff like that, right? Because you got
Yeah.
to think that if there's 20,000 people doing jiu-jitsu, I mean, that are like active in it, which is a low estimate, I think, right? And there's 5,000 active shooters. That's probably not the right
Yeah.
term.
Yeah. No, you're good. No, I mean, it's
but
in the
but
thousands.
there's 5,000 people actually involved in shooting sports,
Hmm.
right? You know, I would say there's probably less than 5,000 people that are actively involved in combatives training, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I,
because like
I
a
would
lot
say
of us,
that's
right?
accurate
Like
at least.
I've got a shooting competition coming up. I'm planning on doing in February. Um, but like there's out of our group, right? Like everybody that's like an instructor, outside of me is a competitive shooter, right? John Valentine's going through his big shooting phase right now. Cole Miller's going through a huge shooting phase right now. I think that Brian's too busy with his, work with ShivWorks to,
And running a new gym in Florida.
yeah,
Well, so, and actually, you gave me a perfect segue because that was going to be my jovial conversation is what two things. What does your shooting training look like right now? And lastly, two-part question: what is your everyday carry pistol? Maybe a couple other items in there. So, your shooting training and competition, and your carry. Well, shoot for it, Matt.
Okay. So I'm on a 410 schedule on third shift, so usually you can find a little bit of downtime. And so I try and dry fire for half
Yeah,
hour to 45 minutes every night that I work,
legit.
depending on call volume. And then I try, every night when I'm sitting here, if my wife doesn't beat me to bed, right, I usually stay here and I'll stay up and dry fire for, maybe not as dedicated of like, working on my draw stroke and things like that, but I'll sit here and I'll get trigger presses in for about an hour, watching TV, following my target, punch out, go to work.
Yeah, punch out, go to work. Yes, you're getting a
You
lot of
know,
dry fire in.
yeah. And then I shoot, depending on, the week. I very rarely shoot more than live fire once a week.
Same here, buddy.
Yeah.
It, it's 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 too expensive right now.
well, so, luckily the department, we're not going through the ammo shortage we were before, and the range officer's a buddy of mine, so he helps me out.
Cool.
But, you know, I'm sure that if I was to go through and burn through 1,000 rounds every week, he probably has sort of be like, probably can't do that every week, but he lets me come and I get an average of, 200 to 300 rounds a week, which
That's
is,
good, man.
yeah, I mean, and then,
I
if I
start
want
getting
to,
to honestly, and it could just be me. I start going into diminishing returns if I shoot
yeah,
much over 300
well,
rounds for a practice session.
you know, um, I think that the key to it for me is I try and be consistent with what I'm doing, that I can kind of be consistent with my results as
Mhm.
far as tracking them. Um, and then, shooting different drills. What I've noticed is that I feel like I've started to develop a little bit of a healing problem from dry fire as much as I have been.
Mm.
So at least that's what I'm blaming it on. It could be on anything, right? Like, I mean, I'm very much so trying to struggle my way through shooting, right? Um, and
Well, and Sam, if I could just point out something I learned recently myself, and a lot of our audience members hear me say this at one point. I shot master class in IDPA. And I don't shoot that level anymore, and I'm getting close to that again. But what I'm bringing that up to say that it is interesting how much more I've learned about my shooting, even in the last 3 years, that I had no clue about back then.
yeah,
And one of those things that I've learned, and frankly, it came from Ben Stager's doubles drill that I really got turned on to it from Matt Pranka,
mhm.
and I learned that I've been putting a shit ton of input into my pistol that I just need to let the pistol do what it's doing. And so I'm just bringing that up to say it's
Yeah,
weird how we, and,
you know,
and stuff like that you can't discover in dry fire, you know.
no, yeah, I will say that it may not all be consistently good, right? But I feel like I'm getting, very consistent. The dots are coming from the same spot each time, same everything like that. But yeah, like I was saying, I feel like I'm not doing a good enough. For whatever reason, I'm pushing my heel into the butt of the pistol too
Mhm.
much, and I'm just like, what the so I'll pop rounds high, and I'm like,
It sounds to me though that you know something that you
yeah,
discovered,
well,
and see that tells me that you have a high degree of observance of what you're doing, is because you're picking up on it, and I'm sure that's something that
we're
you're
gonna get
working
it
through.
figured out. We're gonna
Yeah,
get it figured out.
yeah. So you mentioned competition. Do you
Yeah,
compete in USPSA or
I
IDPA?
haven't. I haven't yet. I'm going to. There's a. I mean, this is gonna be a local meet. It's not anything fancy, but a couple of the over in Anderson County, they have a pretty good shooting league there. So I'm gonna go over there and shoot.
Yeah, and it
Anderson,
doesn't it
yeah,
doesn't have to be anything but
yeah.
just
But I feel
some
like just
folks
getting out
want to.
there and even when I was white belt and I was doing Naga or whatever tournament was that came through, right? It only helped me get ready for whenever it came time for me to grapple at the higher levels.
Yep.
You know, and I think there's a lot to be said for just getting comfort with the stress of the shooting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about that all the time on this show. I mean, it doesn't have to be a regional or a national match or even a sanctioned IDPA, USPSA. But if you're out there competing and you're competing with peers and you're on the line, even at a local level,
Yeah,
there's a lot of value to that, and it is novel stress. It may not be a gunfight, but it's novel stress,
yeah.
and it's all valuable. Well, that's awesome. So last thing, and we'll let you go so you can hang out with your family and probably get some rest here in a minute.
Yeah, I
Is
got court
what
in the morning.
what's that now?
I said, yeah, I've got court in the morning, so I
Yeah,
better pay some attention to my wife.
yeah. So I definitely want to let you go in just less than a minute or so. So
Okay.
because Aaron always has the end of the show, so he always asks music questions. So I'm making the command decision.
So
I'm
I was
asking.
ready for this.
You do have a list?
Yeah.
If you have
Uh,
a list, I'm not gonna, but I'll ask the carry question first. What are you
okay.
carrying, pistol wise, and what other gadgets are you carrying typically as a civilian?
Okay. Uh, so usually it is a Glock 19 Gen 5 with an RMR on it and TLR H1 light on it as well. It's probably a little overkill with the light. I just like to have everything the same between my. There we go.
That's my 19 right there. It
Yeah.
was in my
I just
10-core
like to have,
holster.
yeah, I just like to have everything be the same across all my
Mhm.
platforms, at least pretty close to it. You know, I run a 17 at work.
19's close enough for certain.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't need a 45. Then usually after that, the next thing I add to it is a either a punch dagger or a disciple.
Okay, yeah, disciple, nice. My
Yeah,
disciple's around here
um,
somewhere.
yeah. There we go.
Nice, yeah, disciple's awesome.
Yeah. And then if I don't have my disciple because it's warmer weather or whatever it is, usually it's my punch dagger.
Nice. Nice. Anything else you want to mention, or
Uh,
that's the business stuff?
yeah. Well, my three bands were Corb Lund, Cody Jinks, and Hellbound Glory.
Man, that was quick.
I,
I felt
I was
bad
thinking
because
like no, because
go
like, I
ahead.
was like his brother's gonna be there. I gotta have my answer to this question. So I was sitting that working this off duty gig today. Between listening to your podcast, listening to music, I was like, I'd better have my three bands picked out.
It is funny because Aaron, I love the fact that you're prepared, and I love the fact that you brought it up so we could talk about it, because now Aaron's going to listen to this and he's going to say, "Man, Eric tried to screw me over." And you squared us both away. So no, that's awesome, Sam.
I try.
Sam, I really, really loved having you on, buddy. I wish that Aaron could have been here with us. I definitely want to have you back on again real soon because we got so much more to talk about. And frankly, man, I'm appreciating what you're doing. I'm looking forward to learning from you. And man, just keep doing the thing that you're doing, taking care of your community and keeping us all safe when it comes down to it. So you have a blessed evening. Tell your family that I said that I appreciated you giving us your time and them accepting that. So she's back there somewhere.
Yeah,
But
she's got some appreciation.
yeah, you tell your family that I said hello and that I appreciated them giving
Well, thank you
your
very much.
time. Yep.
Mhm.
Well, Sam,
All right.
you have a good one, brother. We'll talk to
All
you
right.
soon. Okay.
Catch you later. All right.